And I tell people, I say, that cat is pure heart. And he's principled. He's simply...
3 different pressure points are building in Hollywood right now, and the strange part is none of them have actually exploded yet. But when they do, the entire story could shift in seconds. On one side, you've got a presidential pardon request for Diddy sitting in front of Donald Trump, something that could wipe away years of legal consequence with a single signature. On another side, 50 Cent is claiming he holds unreleased footage involving Oprah Winfrey that Netflix allegedly refused to air. And then, almost quietly in the background, Vivica Fox is suggesting she may no longer keep certain things about 50 Cent to herself. Individually, any one of these would already be a major headline. But together, they create a kind of unstable triangle where one move changes how everything else is interpreted. Because here's the uncomfortable reality. Nothing has officially dropped yet. No pardon signed. No footage released. No full exposure from Vivica Fox. But the tension comes from knowing all 3 could happen at any moment without warning. And once even one of them breaks, the others don't stay untouched. They get pulled into the reaction, the backlash, and the speculation that follows. That's why this situation feels different. It's not just about celebrity drama anymore. It's about timing, leverage, and silence being used like a weapon. Right now, all 3 stories are sitting in the same space, waiting for someone to decide they're done waiting. And the question is simple: which one moves first? And what does it destroy when it does? And the moment one of these moves first, everything else stops being theory and becomes damage control. Because right now, all 3 situations are sitting in completely different worlds, but emotionally they're connected through timing, power, and reputation. Let's start with the one that carries the most legal weight. Diddy is currently serving a 50-month federal sentence, just over 4 years after being convicted on charges tied to transporting individuals for illegal purposes linked to commercial activity. It's important to understand that this is not a minor legal situation. This is a federal conviction that already went through trial, evidence, witnesses, and a jury decision. But here's where it gets complicated. The jury did not convict him on everything prosecutors originally pushed for. On the most serious charges, including broader conspiracy and trafficking allegations, he was acquitted. That split verdict matters because it shows the jury accepted part of the case, but rejected the broader narrative prosecutors were trying to prove. So, what you're left with is not a clean ending. It's a fractured one. And now, while Diddy sits in a low-security federal facility in New Jersey, his legal team is doing 2 things at the same time: appealing the conviction and exploring political intervention. That second part is where things become unusual, because a presidential pardon request has now been confirmed to exist in front of Donald Trump. Trump himself acknowledged that contact had been made regarding a pardon request. But instead of giving a direct answer, he framed it in political context, mentioning past tensions, past comments, and how those relationships affect decisions like this. And that's where things get interesting. Because in politics, language like that is not a rejection. It's a delay. A pardon doesn't require courtroom approval. It doesn't require a jury. It doesn't even require public explanation. It is one decision, signed in private and released into public consequences afterward. That means everything Diddy is dealing with legally could, in theory, be rewritten overnight, not by evidence, not by appeal, but by executive power. And that possibility alone changes how people view the entire case. Because supporters see a chance at redemption. Critics see a loophole in accountability. And everyone else sees uncertainty. But while the legal world is dealing with appeals and pardons, the entertainment world is dealing with something completely different: claims, accusations, and unreleased material. This is where 50 Cent enters the picture. 50 Cent has already been heavily involved in producing and promoting documentary content surrounding Diddy's legal troubles. He has positioned himself publicly as someone exposing industry behavior, and he has built a strong narrative identity around calling out powerful figures. Now he's making an even bigger claim. According to him, there exists footage involving Oprah Winfrey that Netflix allegedly refused to air. Not just cut scenes. Not just in used interviews. but specific footage that he says was intentionally left out of a documentary project. And that immediately raises questions. Because Netflix has already released documentary content related to Diddy's legal situation, content that includes interviews, allegations, and trial-related material. It was already controversial on release. But 50 Cent's claim suggests that what the public saw may not be the full version of what was recorded. He claims there was additional material, and that it involved Oprah Winfrey at a private event tied to Diddy. Now, at this stage, it's critical to separate claim from confirmation. Nothing has been independently verified. Netflix has not confirmed this. Oprah has not responded to it in a legal or public capacity. And no footage has been released to the public. But in modern media cycles, confirmation is not always required for impact, because the claim itself becomes the story. 50 Cent further stated that he is willing to release material himself if necessary. That statement alone is enough to shift attention, because it introduces the possibility of a public drop outside official platforms. But so far, nothing has been released. And that silence is important. Because in situations like this, silence is not empty, it's active. It builds anticipation, speculation, and pressure. And the longer it continues, the more people start filling the gaps with assumptions. At the same time, another voice enters the situation, Vivica Fox. Vivica Fox has recently made comments suggesting that she may no longer continue protecting 50 Cent in the same way she has in the past. On the surface, this sounds like personal history resurfacing. They have dated, they have clashed publicly, and they have reconciled at different points over the years. But this time, the tone feels different, because she didn't frame it as a disagreement. She framed it as a limit. And when someone says they may stop protecting someone, it implies there is something being held back, whether it's information, context, or personal history that has not yet been made public. She has not explicitly stated what that information is. And that ambiguity is exactly what gives the statement weight. Because now, instead of one public figure controlling a narrative, there's a suggestion that someone close to them may have alternative information waiting in the background. And that creates pressure. So now you have three separate storylines building at once. One legal, involving a federal conviction and a possible presidential pardon. One media-driven, involving claims of unreleased footage tied to one of the most controversial celebrity cases in recent years. And one personal, involving a former partner suggesting silence is no longer guaranteed. None of these are officially connected, but they all influence perception. Because if the pardon happens first, it reframes everything about accountability. If the footage drops first, it reframes everything about media control and narrative power. And if Vivica Fox speaks first, it reframes everything about credibility and hidden history. Right now, nothing has broken, but everything is in position. And that's what makes this situation different from typical celebrity drama. It's not reacting to an event. It's waiting for one. And whichever one comes first won't just add to the story. It will rewrite the entire direction of it. And the deeper you go into the situation, the more it stops feeling like separate stories and starts feeling like one connected chain reaction waiting for the first trigger. Because while the pardon request sits quietly in the political system, and while 50 Cent continues making claims about unreleased footage, the real tension is that none of these people are moving at the same speed, but all of them are moving toward impact. Let's go back to the legal side for a moment. Diddy's case did not end in a clean sweep for either side. That's what makes it so important in understanding everything happening around him now. The jury convicted him on specific federal charges tied to transporting individuals for illegal purposes, but they rejected the broader racketeering and trafficking narrative prosecutors built the entire case around. That split verdict is the reason both sides are still fighting after the trial. The prosecution can still point to a conviction and say accountability was established. The defense can point to the acquittals and say the most serious allegations did not hold up in court. And sitting in the middle of that legal contradiction is a 50-month sentence that is now being challenged through appeal. But the appeal is not the only pressure point anymore, because now the pardon discussion changes the entire tone. A pardon is not about proving innocence. It is not about relitigating evidence. It is about executive authority overriding consequence. That is why even the discussion of it creates tension beyond the courtroom. Trump confirming that a request exists is enough to turn it into a political conversation, even without action. Because once it enters that space, it is no longer just a legal matter. It becomes a public perception battle. And perception is where the second storyline begins to take over. 50 Cent has built an entire public identity around exposing powerful figures and creating media disruption. His involvement in documentary production around Diddy's legal situation already placed him in a visible position. But now, his claim about unreleased footage involving Oprah Winfrey pushes the narrative into a completely different category. Because this is no longer just about Diddy. Now it involves Oprah, one of the most protected and respected media figures in the world. According to 50 Cent, Netflix chose not to include certain footage in their documentary coverage. He claims this footage involved Oprah at a private event connected to Diddy. He also claims that the decision to exclude it was deliberate. However, it's important to stay grounded here. None of these claims have been verified. Netflix has not confirmed the existence of such footage, and there is no public release or evidence supporting the specific allegations being made. But in modern media environments, the impact of a claim is often immediate, even without proof. Because once a statement like that enters public discussion, it doesn't wait for confirmation. It spreads first, and verification comes later, if it comes at all. And 50 Cent understands that dynamic better than most. He has spent years using public attention, timing, and controversy as tools in narrative building. Whether people agree with him or not, his strategy has always involved controlling attention cycles, dropping claims, creating anticipation, and letting silence do part of the work. But here's the key detail. He still hasn't released the footage. And that gap between claim and action is where pressure builds. Because the longer something like that remains unreleased, the more the public starts to wonder whether it will ever actually appear, or whether its power lies only in the possibility of release. And while that tension sits in the media space, another quieter but equally important pressure point exists in the personal space: Vivica Fox. Her comments about possibly no longer protecting 50 Cent introduce a completely different type of uncertainty. It is not legal. It is not institutional. It is relational. But relational pressure can be just as powerful in public narratives. Because when someone suggests they have been protecting another person, it implies there is something behind the scenes that has not been fully disclosed. And she has not clarified what that is. That silence creates space for interpretation. And interpretation fills gaps faster than facts do. It could be something minor, something personal, something unrelated to any major controversy. Or it could be something that changes how people view 50 Cent's public positioning entirely. The uncertainty is the point. Because now, instead of one stable narrative, there are three unstable ones: a legal case under appeal with potential political intervention, a media claim involving unreleased footage tied to one of the most powerful figures in entertainment, and a personal statement suggesting withheld information may still exist in the background. None of these stories are officially connected, but they overlap in timing, visibility, and public attention. And that overlap creates pressure. Because if the pardon happens first, it doesn't just affect Diddy, it reshapes how people interpret the entire legal process. It turns a court outcome into a political debate. If the footage drops first, it doesn't just affect Netflix, it reframes the entire documentary conversation and potentially shifts attention away from the legal case entirely. And if Vivica Fox speaks first, it doesn't just affect 50 Cent, it could alter how his credibility is viewed in everything he says afterward. That's what makes this situation so unstable. It's not that any single event is guaranteed to happen. It's that any one of them happening first changes the meaning of the others. And in that kind of environment, silence becomes part of the story. Because no one is speaking fully yet. No one is revealing everything. Everyone is holding something back, intentionally or strategically. And the longer that continues, the more tension builds around not just what is known, but what might be revealed next. At this point, the situation is no longer just about Diddy, 50 Cent, Oprah, or Vivica Fox individually. It's about timing. Because in stories like this, timing decides impact, not just truth. And right now, all three pressure points are still waiting for the same thing, someone deciding they are done waiting. At this point, the situation stops being about isolated claims and starts becoming about consequence stacking, where every unresolved piece of the story is quietly waiting for something else to trigger it. Because nothing in this entire narrative exists in isolation anymore. A legal case, a political possibility, a media claim, a personal warning. All of them are now orbiting the same center of attention, and that center keeps shifting depending on who speaks, who acts, and who stays silent. Let's bring it back to where the real tension sits: Diddy's legal position. He is serving a 50-month federal sentence following a split jury verdict. That detail matters more than people realize, because it means the jury did not fully accept the prosecution's most severe framing of the case, but they also did not clear him. Instead, they landed in the middle: conviction on some charges, acquittal on others. That kind of outcome creates long-term instability in public interpretation. Prosecutors still point to the conviction as proof of wrongdoing. The defense points to the acquittals as evidence that the broader accusations did not hold. And now the appeal process attempts to challenge even the part that did stick. But appeals take time. And time creates space for everything else to grow around the case. That is where the pardon discussion becomes so significant. Because a pardon is not a legal correction, it is an executive override. If granted, it does not say the court was wrong. It says the consequences will not continue. And that distinction is why the mere possibility of a pardon changes how people view the entire case. Donald Trump acknowledging that a request exists does not guarantee approval. But it confirms that the request has entered a level of visibility where political calculation becomes part of the equation. And political calculation is rarely about facts alone. It's about timing, optics, and pressure. Which brings us back to the second pressure point: 50 Cent's claims. According to him, there is unreleased footage tied to a Netflix documentary involving Oprah Winfrey. This claim sits at the intersection of entertainment influence and public curiosity, not because it is verified, but because it involves high-profile names and an allegation of withheld material. But here is the critical reality check. There has been no public release of such footage, no independent verification, and no official confirmation from Netflix or any involved parties. So what exists right now is not evidence, it is narrative pressure. And narrative pressure behaves differently from legal pressure. Legal pressure moves through courts. Narrative pressure moves through attention. The moment something like that is mentioned publicly, it begins to exist in the audience's imagination whether or not it exists in reality. And once that happens, silence doesn't erase it, it amplifies it. Because people start asking, if it's not real, why is it being mentioned? And if it is real, why hasn't it been shown? That unresolved gap is what keeps the claim alive. But even that isn't the only unstable element in play. Vivica Fox's comments about potentially no longer protecting 50 Cent introduce a third layer, one that is not legal or institutional, but personal and reputational. And in public-facing industries like entertainment, personal credibility is not separate from public credibility. When someone close to a public figure implies they have been protecting them, it introduces the idea that there are boundaries not yet crossed, information not yet shared, stories not yet told, or interpretations not yet revealed. She has not defined what that means. And that lack of definition is exactly what makes it powerful. Because ambiguity forces speculation. And speculation spreads faster than clarification. So now the structure of the entire situation looks like this. One man sitting in a federal facility with a conviction under appeal and a pardon request in motion. One media figure making claims about unreleased footage tied to one of the most influential names in global entertainment. And one former partner hinting that silence is not permanent. None of these threads are officially connected. But they are psychologically connected because they all operate on the same currency: attention and timing. And timing is what makes everything unstable. If the pardon happens first, it reframes the entire legal case into a political discussion. If the footage ever surfaces, it reframes the entire media narrative around what was shown versus what was withheld. And if Vivica Fox speaks first, it could shift how everything else is interpreted afterward, including credibility, motivation, and intent. But here is the part that often gets missed in stories like this. Nothing has actually moved yet. No pardon signed. No footage released. No confirmation of hidden claims. Just pressure. And pressure has a strange effect in situations like this. It builds perception before it builds reality. People start reacting to what might happen instead of what has happened. And once that shift occurs, the story stops being about facts alone. It becomes about anticipation. That is why this situation feels so active even in silence. Because silence is not empty here. It is loaded. And every participant in this narrative seems to understand that. No one is rushing. No one is fully revealing. Everyone is waiting for the moment where holding back becomes less powerful than speaking out. And that is the final state this story is in right now, not resolution, not conclusion, but suspension. A suspended moment where three separate forces are all close enough to impact each other, but none of them have made contact yet. And when one finally does, it will not just add to the story. It will reset how the entire story is understood. So the real question is no longer about who is right or wrong. It's about who moves first. Because in a situation like this, the first move doesn't just start the next chapter. It decides what the rest of the chapters even look like. If you've followed this far, you already know this story isn't slowing down anytime soon. It's still building pressure, and the next move could come from anywhere at any time. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the pardon actually happens, or is it just political noise? And what about 50 Cent's claim? Is it real leverage or just another strategic threat to keep attention? Or do you think Vivica Fox is the real wild card here, holding back something that could change everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this situation is still unfolding and the next update could completely flip the narrative again. If you want more deep breakdowns like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update when this story moves again. Because one thing is clear, this isn't over yet.